And welcome back to your next GCSE Buddhism revision. Today we're going to explore the moment of radical transformation in the Buddha's life when the illusion of the palace luxury shattered with just 4 encounters, the 4 sights, and they led Siddhartha Gautama into one of the most extreme phases of his life, the ascetic life. Let's dive into the experience that sets Buddhism on the road to enlightenment. So here's what we're mastering today. We're going to be able to know the 4 sights in order clearly, explain what they mean to Buddhists, also explain Buddhist beliefs about the ascetic life, explain 2 ways belief in the 4 sights and the ascetic life influence Buddhists today, and evaluate statements relating to the 4 sights and the ascetic life. So, the 4 sights. Siddhartha Gautama lived in total luxury until he left the palace, aged 29, with Channa, his charioteer, and saw for the first time an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a holy man. These weren't just chance encounters, they opened his eyes to the truth of suffering, what Buddhists call dukkha. A Pali Canon, the Buddhist holy scripture, says aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, and death is suffering. And if you look clearly, that refers to the first of the 3 of the 4 sights. The old man, sick man, and dead man taught the Buddha all about dukkha. And the Buddha clearly says in the Pali Canon, what I teach is suffering and the cessation of suffering. And here is when he experienced suffering firsthand with his own eyes. Also, the old man teaches the Buddha about anicca, change, impermanence, of which we'll look at in a future video. Sickness obviously teaches dukkha, and the dead man opened his eyes to the idea that later became known as anatta, or no self or no soul. These are also found in the Jataka tales. Just be aware of that holy scripture also. So how do they influence the Buddha and Buddhists today? Well, Buddhists today reflect deeply on the 4 sights. The old man reminds them that life is changing. It's always changing. Nothing is impermanent. The teaching of anicca. The sick man shows dukkha, and it shows that dukkha is universal. Even the Buddha faced it in his ascetic life. The dead man reminds them of anatta, that we're not eternal, we're not an essential self. And the holy man is a bit different. The holy man inspired the Buddha to follow the middle way, to find hope, to be inspired to go on this quest, this journey to find enlightenment. And it inspires Buddhists today to follow the middle way and the Eightfold Path. These sights help Buddhists accept suffering and they respond wisely to it. Okay, so after the Buddha saw these 4 sights, he decided to leave the palace. He was shocked by what he saw. So he did the unthinkable. He left the grand palaces and the life of luxury and his wife and newborn son and his father and his life and duty as a future king. He left it all behind. He left his palaces, his wealth, his future as king. This moment is called the Great Renunciation. He went into the forest determined to find the truth about life through meditation, discipline, and silence. So this moves on to the ascetic life. Siddhartha pushed his body to the absolute extremes after studying meditation for a period of time with some meditation masters. He ate only 3 sesame seeds a day, which eventually, as the Pali Canon records, made him look like a skeleton, and that's in the Pali Canon. He slept on a bed of thorns. He kept holding his breath until he fainted. For 6 years he lived like this, but he didn't find the answers to what he was looking for. In fact, he became like the first 3 sights. He looked older, his skin was wrinkly, he could see the ribs, in his chest. He was sick, he was ill, he had headaches, he couldn't meditate properly, and he became almost close to the dead man. He became very close to death. So he rejected this life after 6 years. So how does the ascetic life influence Buddhists today? Well, modern Buddhists reflect on the Buddha's mistake in going too far. He suffered, so they didn't need to live that life. They can learn from his error there. His suffering taught him this: neither indulgence nor self-harm leads to truth. You should not live a life of indulgence or luxury, and you shouldn't live the life of an ascetic. This is why today Buddhists follow the middle way. Not too much, not too little. Just the right balance. Just like the Buddha taught in the sitar analogy. Now, as you can see there from the image, a sitar is a musical instrument. The Pali Canon talks about the sitar analogy. If the string is too tight, it will snap. If too loose, it won't play. The Buddha realized this, and this is when he changed direction. So a quick fire quiz. What was the first of the 4 sights? And of course the answer there is the old man. You do have to learn these ones in order. Old man, sick man, dead man, holy man. Next question. Which keyword means living a life that pushes your body to the extreme? And of course that is what we've just gone over, the ascetic life. What is the 4th sight? So sometimes they can give you questions where there is no multiple choice. In this case, the answer would be the holy man. And give one example of the Buddha's ascetic life. So in this one, there's plenty of different examples you could give. For example, he only ate 3 sesame seeds a day, or he held his breath until he fainted, or he slept on a bed of thorns, or he lived a dangerous life in the forests. You could also get this question. Explain 2 ways belief in the 4 sights influences Buddhists today. So again, you need 2 beliefs about the 4 sights. You can talk about them holistically, or you can talk about focusing on one of the 4 sights. And then you explain how this influences Buddhists today. What would it make them do or feel or think? So pause the video, have a go at that question, and I'll show you a waggle. Okay, and here is a waggle. I've chosen to talk about the 2nd and 4th sights in this answer. The 2nd sight taught Buddha about the nature of dukkha. This makes Buddhists realise that suffering is an inevitable part of life, and this can help comfort them knowing the Buddha too experienced pain. The 4th sight gave the Buddha hope that he could overcome dukkha. This makes Buddhists want to follow the Dharma and the middle way so they too can move on their own journey to alleviate dukkha. Just a reminder that dukkha means pain, suffering, unsatisfactoriness. Here's another 4-mark influence question. Explain 2 ways belief in the Buddha's ascetic life influences Buddhists today. Pause the video and have a go at this one. And here is a example response. The Buddha suffered and only ate 3 sesame seeds a day that he looked like a skeleton. This makes Buddhists realise they should not use extreme methods to push their bodies, as the Buddha shown this only leads to more suffering. Also, the Buddha rejected his ascetic life, instead finding the middle way. This makes Buddhists try to also follow the middle way in between indulgence and asceticism. For example, eating a balanced diet, not starving yourself and not going for extra helpings all the time. So 6-mark questions. Here's an example on the 4 sights. Explain 2 Buddhist beliefs about the 4 sights, and remember it also adds refer to sacred writing or another source of Buddhist belief and teaching in your answer. Have a pause, have a go at that question. And here's a response. The Buddha left the life of luxury with Channa and saw the 4 sights. The first three sites were an old man, a sick man, and a dead man. So here we've got a point with some development. A source, the Pali Canon states, and I quote, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, is used there to exemplify or extend that response to evidence the point that's being made. And then we're going to link it right back to the four sites. Therefore, this quote introduced the Buddha to the realities of life and that dukkha is all around us and inevitable. And then just a simple point with development is needed. The Buddha also saw a holy man as the fourth site. This site inspired the Buddha to leave his life of luxury for good and go on to teach the spiritual truths. Go on, I think that's supposed to say in search of spiritual truths, hoping to find the solution to suffering. And finally, another 6 mark there. Explain 2 Buddhist beliefs about the Buddha's ascetic life, and of course refer to sacred writing or another source of Buddhist belief and teaching in your answer. Pause the video, have a go. And here is a response. The Buddha lived in the forest with 5 other ascetics, pushing his body to the extreme. The Pali Canon says the Buddha looked like a skeleton, as he only ate 3 sesame seeds a day towards the end of this ascetic life. Apply that quote back to the question. Therefore, this quote shows how he endured significant suffering and faced the realities of dukkha in the world. The Buddha also studied and practiced meditation as part of his ascetic life. However, he struggled to meditate properly as all he could think about was hunger, leading him to reject the ascetic life. Okay, here's 2 examples of evaluation statements. The 4 sites is the most important moment in the Buddha's life. Now, obviously, arguing against this statement can be very difficult because you might not have yet studied other aspects of the Buddha's life, or you might not yet have studied other important teachings that can be applied to the 4 sites. But here's some ideas of some of the arguments you could give in support and against this statement. So you could say the 4 sites was inspiration or a dynamic moment in his life that inspired him to leave the life of luxury. It was a catalyst for his renunciation. It introduced him to what we're later going to study, the 3 marks of existence. Anicca, impermanence, everything changes. Anatta, no self, no soul. And dukkha, suffering, pain, unsatisfactoriness, being inevitable. Without seeing the 4 sites, and without that hope on the 4th site, the inspiration to go on this quest to find the cause of suffering, without those, he may never have left the palace. Arguments against could be his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, when he fought against Mara in his mind, when he studied meditation, when he actually lived the ascetic life, you could argue, was more important, because this really taught him about suffering. And remember the quote, what I teach is suffering and the cessation of suffering. So he came face to face with suffering in his ascetic life. You could argue that the middle way and his rejection of asceticism had a more practical impact and is more relevant to Buddhists today. And Buddhists value the whole Dharma, the whole of the Buddhist teachings, not just one little element, for example, the 4 sites. Another question there, the Buddha didn't need to live the ascetic life, where you could argue, for example, that he learnt the middle way. That would be an argument against, that he learnt firsthand the suffering, and that helped him to reject the extremes, finding the middle way, which Buddhists use to this day. Arguments for, well, he nearly died, right? He rejected this life. He walked away from this life. You could argue it delayed his enlightenment, being 6 years in the forests and then walking away and rejecting it. You could argue it's the Buddha. He could have learnt about the middle way without self-torture and going to the extremes that he did, for example. So finally, key points to take away. Siddhartha Gautama left his life of luxury after witnessing the four sights: old man, sick man, dead man, and holy man. The first three sights introduce Buddha to the three marks of existence: aging, anicca, change, impermanence; sickness, dukkha, pain, suffering, unsatisfactoriness; and death, anatta, no self, no soul. The Pali Canon says this great quote: aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, and death is suffering. The foresight gave the Buddha hope on his own spiritual journey. The fourth sight was a real turning point in the Buddha's life. This led to the Great Renunciation, where the Buddha decided to leave his life of luxury for good, cutting his hair short, wearing simple robes, living in the forests. He initially studied meditation, and then he lived an ascetic life by pushing his body to the extremes. He only ate up to 3 sesame seeds a day during the last parts of this ascetic life. He slept on a bed of thorns, and the Pali Canon says, "I look like a skeleton." Once rejecting the ascetic life, he found the middle way, the path in between indulgence and asceticism, shown in the instrument, the sitar analogy. If the strings are too tight or the strings are too loose, the sitar won't play a nice tune. The same with our life. We can't live so strictly or so indulgently. We need to be living within moderation, in the middle way. Hope that has inspired you to go away and revise for this topic. Well done. See you next time.